Just before we start what we were going to record, could we please do a intro for the Chris Milligan episode?
Yep. Okay, sweet.
The backstory being that, embarrassingly, we recorded it nearly 12 months ago, but due to a range of technical failures, it has not been released, and the last one being a significant echo on the intro. So let's try and do this sitting in San Francisco.
Yes, so we apologize, Chris, but the legend that is Chris Milligan is part of the reason the tribe actually exists, because Chris joined me on a London mission way back, and it was a result of that trip that Chris had moved to the UK, ended up scaling there and exiting his company there. He now invests in companies across both sides of the ditch, and he's going again as a serial entrepreneur. And Chris is also a venture partner and shareholder in Tribe Global Ventures. And I always love our conversations with Chris, particularly around building companies for exit. And having successfully done that, he's got quite a unique approach to how he goes about things and his considered approach to building businesses. So absolutely love this conversation. And Chris, mate, so sorry it took us so long to get this one actually published.
All right, let's get into the episode.
I wanted to go and take what I'd learned and see if I could, to be honest, prove to myself, was that just hard work and a bit of luck, or do I know how to build companies? So we went through probably nearly 100 million in revenue. We raised 50 million Series D, and so saw some great stuff. I really like the building phase, not the scale and process phase. I think you have to always keep an exit strategy in mind. I don't think, as a founder and also from an investor hat, you don't want to waste time on things that aren't going to bear fruit, and you need to be focused on building the company. Not every business can be that breakout standalone business that goes public one day. So you need to just be honest about that.
Okay, I think it is recording.
Sweet.
We'll just check that, Aaron. There's a cable from there into there. The last time we were on this deck, there was no cable plugged in.
Well, there is a cable this time.
And I wouldn't want to embarrass us in front of our good friend, who would then realise exactly how incompetent we are.
It's a good setup.
Thanks for coming, Chris. Great to have you.
All the way from the UK just to see us.
Yep.
What time's your flight home?
Sunday. Go via LA this time, though.
Oh, wow. That's an interesting way to go.
That's what happens when you do points.
Oh, so you don't have meetings?
No. It's just 6 hours in the airport.
That sounds like fun.
I hope the points are worth it. So for listeners, how did you come into our orbit? Where did you guys first meet?
I was trying to remember the year that we went to the UK together. Was it 2015 or 2016?
It was 2015.
15.
So we joined the mission to London Tech Week in 2015. I think Joel, our head of product, had got to know you.
Yep.
Said, we should go over to London. And I was living in Sydney at the time and thought, yeah, why not? Let's go and check it out.
And the way I tell the story to others, just maybe I've embellished it, but you were thinking more of the US at that point, is that correct? Or were you always looking at the UK as a potential market?
Yeah, so I was running a small tech company in Brisbane, and I thought I'll move to Sydney because I need to try and raise some money. And I got to Sydney in 2014 and I couldn't raise any money. So I thought Australia's just not the place. And so I was thinking about the US. There was a mission we did to the US as well, but it must have been after the London one. And so I'd never really considered, that is true, I'd never considered the UK as a market. It wasn't something that I thought big tech and starting businesses and entrepreneurship was in the UK. So I just went for a bit of a jolly, to be honest.
I do remember. So that is my memory, which is good because I do worry sometimes my memory's going. But
you should try working with you.
That would be a whole podcast episode to itself. But yeah, I remember you were looking at the UK as not so much maybe a market, but I'm just going to have fun on this mission.
Yeah. And I think my ex had just moved there. So I was like, I'll go and annoy her a bit. And also my grandfather was Scottish, which ended up helping because I could get visas really easily in that. But I learnt a lot of that when I was there.
And so for listeners at home, could you describe Adepto, the company that you had at the time?
Yeah, so Adepto it started off as a contractor marketplace. So out of university, I was consulting or contracting to blue chip businesses doing HR work like Suncorp and Horizon, and before the gig economy was cool. And I remember I was rolling off a contract and I went to interview with Deloitte, and Deloitte offered me a role as a senior manager, and they said, you'll be the the youngest senior manager in the country, and we're going to pay you 80 grand. And I thought, well, that's a bit shit because I'm earning the equivalent of 150 grand on a day rate. So I want to keep doing that. But it was very difficult for me to find those jobs because recruiters couldn't put me in a box. So I thought there's got to be a better way. And I started a marketplace effectively where contractors and consultants could sign up and put their skills and availability. And then we went and advertised that to those types of businesses and ended up managing their payroll in the back office. So we took 22% margin. And in the first business, did a few million in revenue. But I then quickly realized all we'd done is built another recruitment company. And in fact, those businesses in many cases already knew who they should hire, as in they had some affiliation with them, but there was no way to stay in touch with these consultants or freelancers because once they left your corporate ecosystem, there was a spreadsheet or a LinkedIn group. And so we set it up as a talent pool where you could invite all of your contractors and freelancers to it. And then it evolved to actually invite your employees too. And whenever projects were started, we would integrate into the applicant tracking system or vendor management system, and it would spit out what you were looking for. And then we'd say, actually, you already know Aaron and Chris, and there's no cost to hire them because Aaron already works for you. Or Chris is an alumni, he's just left. So it ended up being what we called total talent management system.
Awesome. And when you came on that mission to the UK in 2015, where was the company at that time?
So we had recently pivoted from doing the payroll and the recruitment aspects of it to just being software. We had 2 or 3 enterprise clients in Brisbane. So AECOM was one. The Queensland government was using it to help people move between departments. And we were at, I think it was about $1 million of annual recurring revenue.
Yeah. And so you go on the UK trip, and what happened after that?
So on that trip, we met a lot of accelerators and investors and got to see all these exciting tech companies that at the time you didn't rub shoulders with in Oz. And that was exciting. But what was more exciting is there was a PwC program called the Future of Work that they were running as an accelerator, which they invited us to be part of. We had to apply and go and meet a guy called Alex Sainty, who I'm still friends with. He was running that program. And he said, why don't you apply? And I got back to Sydney, and then he said, hey, you're in. It starts in a month back in London. And so I looked at it, and the program was, I think it was a 12-week program where you go through a lot of different focus areas. You get the opportunity to pitch to enterprise clients in London. And then at the end was a investor presentation where you could try and raise some capital. So I commuted back and forth from Sydney to London for 3 months. There was some scenarios where I got in the day before a presentation to 100 people. And then we ended up pitching to investors at the end of that. And I said, look, I live in London and I'm raising £1 million. And they said, well, that's great. I hope it's glad to know that you live in London.
At what point did you end up living in London?
A few months later.
Aspirational, like you were going to.
Well, that's the issue, isn't it? A lot of the investors, I know you guys will have opinions on this, want you to be near them, especially the early stages. So we had some investors in Australia. We then ended up raising that £1 million, and everyone said, well, you have to be here. The company has to be here. You have to be here. And then subsequently, when I looked at raising money in the US, it was the same thing again. Oh, well, you need to be here. So it was difficult to figure out where to actually be. But London made sense. So I basically packed up. We had a team of 20 people in Australia, and I moved to London. When I say moved, as you guys know, I didn't really move. I lived in the UK, but I had a suitcase and I moved around every week to different Airbnbs and hotels for about 2 years. But I was a resident of the country. And so, yeah, we closed the round and then I tried to build the rest of the go-to-market really in the UK.
And do you think that's still very much the case, that if you are going to seek investment from people domiciled in whatever jurisdiction, they're totally anchored to you being there, or was it just more your phase of the life cycle and they wanted to make sure that because you were so early, you were going to be really behind the UK?
I think it was that it was a transition period for the business. They wanted to make sure that I was serious about actually establishing the company there rather than just staying in Australia and raising money from them, because the UK to Australia is opposite ends of the world. There's not much they could do if we just ran away with the money. I'd also think the world was different at that point. I think that was pre-COVID, long way pre-COVID, the notion of being able to communicate effectively remotely probably wasn't as mainstream. So I think it has changed now, but I do think at that stage, seed and Series A, the investors want to be in the market that you're trying to attack. I think those stage of investors are investing in a company that they're not going to see or be able to help in any way.
Trying to think through case studies of companies that went to the UK, US, any country that didn't have the founder there for a good chunk of time, giving it that early energy that was then a big success. I think if you look through any of the big successes, there was a period of time where that founder's energy was just on the ground in the time zone. Sure, find people and transition people or whatever else, but this idea that you can do too much of it remote, even with the tools, I think may still be a challenge.
Yeah, I do meet other founders who are saying, "Oh, I'm gonna come and enter this market, and I'm gonna come in once a month. But here's my head of sales, and he or she's really gonna to drive that." And I think they realize pretty quickly that doesn't work. They need to be there for. It's not a part-time job. You can't say, "Oh, well, this will work," and I'm just going to send some other people to do it at that stage. You've got to be evangelizing the business. You've got to be out there hustling. You've got to be hiring. You've got to be doing all the things that you did in the first market that you started. Once it's a more well-oiled machine, obviously, and you've got some scale, you don't need the founder there. But I think Series A isn't that.
In terms of your go-to market in the UK, you referenced Alex Sainty and the PwC program, which he then spun out. My limited interactions with Alex, it seems like a phenomenal program in terms of the support and the way it helps companies get those first clients. But other than the success parts of that go-to-market, what were the things, where did you fail? Where did you fuck up? And what were the lessons from that?
Yeah, there are a lot of lessons. One of the first issues that we ran into was I left Australia. We were $1 million in revenue, which at the time was that figure you have to hit $1 million, and then you can start talking about raising some more capital. And so we'd done that. But as soon as we got to London, you got to speak in pounds. You got to contextualize everything to the market you're talking in. So instead of it being $1 million, it was now all of a sudden £600,000. So the investors said, "Well, that's great. We've only got 400 more to go." and I was like, "Oh, fuck, like this has been hard yakka to get here. We're running out of money. I don't know if I can get another 400. So that was one. The other was just doing it all again and doing it again by yourself, really without any support. It is a long way away. And the strategy for us was, I think, the right strategy to go and win business, to try and get some clients, get some early traction in country with local brands. Even though we had international clients like AECOM, the UK sees Australia as a colony. When you say it's AECOM Brisbane, they kind of laugh and say, that's nice. Well done, cousin. So you got some references to maybe get you in the door, but you need to get some local clients locally contracted. And so what ended up happening was we built basically the sales and what ended up being marketing and finance in the UK. And we kept our product and engineering teams in Australia, which worked well from a cost perspective, because if you're earning £1 and paying Aussie, you had a good arbitrage in terms of the financial structure. But from a cultural perspective, it meant that we stopped focusing so much on winning business in Australia, and we focused all our efforts in the UK. But the team in Australia then felt like, oh, well, we're not really part of this business. We're not part of the events. We're not out there talking to clients. We're here in this back office building everything, and the business doesn't care about us anymore, which wasn't the case, obviously. They're a key part of the business and the engine room, but the investment into all those types of things wasn't happening there. And so what that resulted in is a bit of obviously they're different countries and different cultures as it is, but even more of a cultural divide between the teams and actually a lot of friction. And that was really hard to navigate.
Yeah, how did you address that?
Well, we ended up getting the whole team together in different countries. So I think we did that once a year. It's a big cost at that stage to fly everybody around. And then we started doing some rotations of different people. So we'd take 1 or 2 people from Australia to the UK and vice versa, just to try and build some rapport. We tried all the things like, because at that time we were going to the office every day, putting a camera in the corner that was always on, so it wasn't so clinical to have to join a meeting. It was like you could just walk up and chat to it, but that doesn't really work because people feel like they're being spied on or don't go up, and it's not as organic as you think. And also the overlap's only 3 hours, depending what time of the day you wake up. So there wasn't a silver bullet. There was just a lot of those types of things. And it did really distract me from running the business to having to deal with the people and culture side of things.
So you did those things after the fact, but in hindsight, for our founders and supporting investors listening, what would you have done at the very beginning? Is sometimes we hear people would have delayed their expansion, or not delayed it, but maybe not have kept engineering there, maybe split engineering up. Are any of those things, with the benefit of hindsight, things that you would have done different?
I probably would not, and what I'm about to say isn't just about this dynamic. What I would have done differently is I would have probably changed team members out far more quickly, knowing what I know now. I think part of what we dealt with was the kind of expansion issue, but it was also expansion comes with, or needs to have, a different mindset associated with it. And I don't think I recognized that at the time, to actually say, well, these people can't stretch. They can't imagine that we're now an international organization. And Australia fundamentally wasn't the be all and end all for us. It was going to be that market and then that market. Unless you could get excited and behind that, then you're the wrong person, because you can't just continue to think about us as an Australian business. The founder and CEOs and overseas telling you that we're not. So why aren't you listening? So I think that was one key bit around changing the team out. I think what we should have also done, and we ended up doing probably a bit too late, was then starting to hire some of those other functions, so that we had sales and customer success here as well as product and engineering there. So it didn't feel like two different functions. It was more just local teams. And I think getting some of those rotation programs earlier, so that everyone recognizes that this is going to be the future, would be important. Those are probably the three things that I'd do sooner.
We don't only invest in B2B tech companies, we also run missions over to the US and the UK, as well as offsite, which we open up to the broader ecosystem. That's founders, that's investors.
Our missions are about taking founders and investors into the UK and US markets, so that, one, they can understand what it takes to scale into those markets and set up shop in those markets, but also to see over the horizon into the latest tech, how capital's being allocated, so that they can come back home and transform and scale their business.
Yeah, I like the way we put on panels of founders that have been there and done it, panels of investors, so then that way they get some time pitching to US or UK investors, the channel partners that we put them in touch with. It's really trying to get them into market so they can establish exactly what they need to do in order to scale a really great business over there.
Yeah, we really prioritise this not being tech tourism or something that you could simply YouTube or Google or GPT the answer to from home. It's really about experiencing and immersing in these environments where you viscerally experience scale. You get to understand disruption and how these technologies are actually being applied in market, and therefore how you can navigate and build a scalable business into those markets.
If this is something of interest, shoot us a DM. And enough of that, back to the podcast.
Constantly we see, if you can't change the people, change the people.
That's right.
But one of the structural, like pre-COVID, that form of having your go-to-market team overseas, your engineering back in Australia, that was really common. And one of the drivers, like you said, was definitely foreign exchange rates, but also the R&D tax incentives. And I know the UK has quite solid R&D tax incentives. But the other one was access to talent, like particularly in Silicon Valley when companies go to the US, the retention of technical talent is really difficult, the cost of the technical talent. What are you seeing now, though, post-COVID, in a world where you can have workers anywhere in the world remote? How's that factoring into what you're building now? And do you still see, given your exposure to Aussie companies going over, do you still see this model of go-to-market overseas engineering in Australia, or is it less relevant now?
So the few questions in that, mate. I need to unpack all those.
Do you want to add another one in, Aaron, just to really get it home?
I can if you want.
So the talent piece, I'll start with there. I think every market in terms of tech talent continues to improve, right? Because people have experience. Technology improves. There's companies that are built and sold or not sold, but people then learn and go through that cycle. So back then, the talent that we managed to get in London was superior to Australia because we were lucky, at least thinking about recruiting in Brisbane at the time to London. They had exposure to these businesses and these companies that have cut the future. They weren't maybe where Silicon Valley was, but they're a bit ahead of Australia. So that was really beneficial to have that kind of energy of people who have been there, done that, knew what to do, could get stuck in. But that also created a bit of a divide because they knew what good looked like, whereas our kind of really early team was still trying to figure it out and having that kind of correct early stage mindset of like, no, we'll just test and learn. And it was like, no, we don't need to do that now because these guys know what to do. So let's just do it this way. I think that has probably, or it's certainly changed now. Like I think that generally technology capabilities, I don't mean development, but go to market, product marketing, product management, sales, that's all just across the board leveled up for sure. In terms of companies now, I think that the model, like there are different go-to-market models. There's some remote-only go-to-market models depending on the business model. At the time, we were enterprise sales, and enterprise sales was very face-to-face. That's changed a lot. In my current business, there are some accounts that we've not met in person, and we're trying to get some more FaceTime now because we're seeing that it's important, given our business model, to build wider relationships in our accounts. But for the first 2 years, there are many of them that we'd never met in person, and we're in the same country. So I think that has changed. I wouldn't think that that's now as much of a limiting factor. I think there was another question in there somewhere, but I can't remember it.
I can't remember it either.
I'll go back to the tape later and we can work through. But with some of the cultural differences between Aussie and UK customers, sometimes we hear that just in the UK they're very polite. They'll say yes to a meeting, they'll say yes to a follow-up meeting, they'll say, "Oh, that sounds wonderful, chap." They're not as forward in coming back with harsh feedback to say, "No, that's never going to work," and they can that sales cycle can get stretched out. Is that just an old cliche, or is that true?
No, that's true. And I've been there now for coming up on 9 years, and I still can't figure it out. I still can't read it. I'm forever saying to English people in my team, like, what are they saying?
Help me translate this.
Yeah. And it's often, it's a slow no or never a no. It's just look, we can't look at this right now, or it's on our roadmap for later in the year. And I get really frustrated. I don't think there's a great solution for that. You just have to go with your gut. I think a lot of what I learned is just if it looks and feels and smells a certain way, then it probably is. You just need to accept it. You can ask the question that you're afraid of the answer of, like, am I wasting my time with you? Are you ever going to sign up? But yeah, I wouldn't spend too much time on it.
What's the point? No, I think it's important that in some jurisdictions it's sort of like follow the behaviour, not the words.
That's right.
And have a sales process that builds in those behaviours. And there was a lot of lessons, obviously, from that first time round, but you went over there, you built a business, but then you sold it. Could you talk through that process whilst you were over there?
The process was we were becoming well established in the UK, so we'd won some bigger accounts. The category that we were playing in, talent management or talent marketplaces as it is known now, wasn't really a category. It was still pretty nascent. Unfortunately, we were a bit before our time. We didn't nail it, and I'm not saying we created the market and how good are we. It was like we were just too early, and I don't know what we could have done about that. But because we were too early, we saw that we needed to partner with other organizations in established categories to pull us through. And so there was a business called Degreed that was a category creator. They created a learning experience platform that the Fortune 500 used to consolidate all of the learning that people can do in the organization. So pulling in LMSs, homegrown content, YouTube, Coursera, podcasts, everything, so you can see what your employees are learning. And then that would show what your gaps were. So as an organization saying, can we go from combustion engines to electric vehicles? How can the CEO say yes if he doesn't or she doesn't know what the skills are and what the gaps are to make that transition? So hugely relevant. And because of that, they knew what the skills of the workforce were, whereas Adepto knew what the work was. We didn't really have a good way of mapping the skills of what people said they could do. So we partnered with Degreed, and the whole idea was Degreed would be the understanding of skills, and Adepto would be the deployment of skills. Great narrative, really resonates with both learning leaders and HR and talent leaders. And so we started partnering on some deals, and then they saw what we were doing as a kind of core component of their future, is to expand their addressable market. And so I just hired a salesperson in New York, and then Degreed finally said, "Hey, we've got this idea. We'd like to run it by you. Can you come over?" So I then spent 3 or 4 months back and forth from London to San Francisco and Salt Lake City, and got to a point where they said, "Look, we want to acquire you," and that was just before COVID. And then COVID obviously hit like 6 weeks later, and we had an earnout. So that was a difficult time. I can maybe talk about structures. And okay, so when we moved to the UK, we were an Australian topco, and we had the classic, which I still see on decks, Australian IP entity and Australian go-to-market entity. And I don't know where that advice comes from, but no one else seems to do that. So in the UK, it's just one entity, just crack on. So that was a bit weird for the investors, because they were like, "Why do you have 3 entities? Where's the IP really held?" So it was confusing. But we persevered, and we said, "Well, look, we're an Australian company. We're not going to go through all the costs of flipping up." So we kept Australia as our top co, and we set up a UK subsidiary. And so that was our UK trading entity. We then had to do a few things to become EIS qualifying, so you could get the EIS and SEIS, investor tax relief, which is really where the first couple of million in any business in the UK is raised through. And then as we were going through acquisition, we were then really a UK headquartered business with an Australian topco being bought by an American business. So you can imagine the complexity in that. You've got US lawyers, UK lawyers, and Australian lawyers. And what that resulted in was a really complicated share purchase agreement, and our key lawyers being Australian lawyers that really didn't have a lot to do with the actual business day to day. And so that was difficult, just navigating time zones. Basically trying to get all party calls together was really hard. But we got through that, and we managed to sign the deal. And then pretty much overnight, Degreed was about 650 people. We were about 50 people. And within a week or two, everyone was integrated into functional roles and cracking on. And we had a big all hands kickoff in Vegas in February. So it was like really different world to what I'd learnt through and fumbled through. And then, yeah, we had an earnout that was structured, that we had 6 months basically. And then COVID hit. So that was a pretty stressful time for the whole team, just trying to figure out how can we get deals done. But yeah, Degreed's still around today and continuing to do pretty well.
And at that point, had Degreed done one of these acquisitions before?
They had done one prior to.
Okay,
Adepto.
so they were coming into it probably with a few lessons.
Yeah.
Because one of the things we do find is that if founders are exiting to a company that it's their first acquisition, they've got to be really careful, because they will often screw it up.
Yeah.
But it sounds like to integrate in the manner that you did there, they must have done a few things right.
There was some really good cultural alignment, and our team had spent a fair bit of time in the US with them prior to that, and we'd mapped out what it was all going to look like. The bit that we probably didn't spend enough time on was the updated go-to-market. The model made sense from a product perspective, from a talent perspective, but we didn't change the way that we then went and resold the new offering and repositioned in the market. It was more of an approach of, we'll just use existing distribution channels and plug a new product in, which it was a different buyer, a different budget, a different message. And that wasn't given at the time enough attention.
Yeah, sometimes I think people say, well, I've got this existing relationship and they're buying X. And so if I just bring this other product, they'll be receptive. But that whole go-to-market often we find complex, because people have a certain thing in their mind about who you are and what they're buying from you. When you bring something else, it actually takes them a little while, a bit of nurturing, a bit of trust. And I've getting that go-to-market right is so important.
Yeah. And the whole moving into a completely different buyer and a different relationship in your account. We see accounts as like, this is our customer. How good is that? We know that they're our customer, but another person in that department who doesn't know you at all, doesn't know that you're a supplier and has never had anything to do with you, is a pretty much, maybe apart from procurement, an entirely new buying cycle.
It's such a good point. Going back to that structural piece, you referenced the Australian common structure that we see. For an Aussie founder that's sitting here looking at going global, but also a likely acquisition path in another market, how would you advise them to be setting things up?
I think you can just get away with one company that is the investment vehicle where the shareholders sit, where the employees sit, and where you have customer contracts. I think until you're getting to a scale of which I don't know what it is until there's costs associated with flipping that, it just keeps it simpler for everybody. We're all advised on asset protection, keep the IP here, keep this, that here. I don't know if that ever actually eventuates where someone says, I'm really glad that I structured 3 entities. It must, but I don't know how high that is or what the risks are at an early stage of business. Like, it's probably just an existential risk. If someone has an issue with you, the whole group's probably kaput, unless you're in some kind of deep R&D tech where you've spent loads of money on something and you really need to keep it separate. But
I think that's the point there, is having had to put a couple of things into administration and liquidation because of various things. It depends on the depth of R&D. It depends on the size of IP. In one scenario, I was very grateful that things had been kept separate, but I totally agree. In other situations, people, if they've got an issue with you, just go after all of the companies.
Mm.
So there's not that. It's more. It's if someone's having a crack at you from the outside, it's not as effective. But if you're trying to protect from certain activities that give rise to questions around solvency, it does provide something. But at that early stage, and the problem is at that early stage, later on, you've then got to deal with the tax implications if you want to if you want to change it. But I think the main thing is it's not a one size fits all, as you've said. It depends. But companies that, if your IP is a logo, a website, and some smart processing stuff, that's very different to millions of dollars spent on something that's then reusable in multiple jurisdictions. And sometimes founders feel a bit more special if they can say, I've got 3 entities versus just one.
Yeah. Yeah. So that, I guess, other than that, the international investing, again, post-COVID, I think has become a bit more mainstream. Like you'll have US firms investing in a UK company or in an Australian company. I don't think they have to be local entities anymore.
Yeah.
And I think if you've got the traction and you've got the exciting deal, investors will climb over themselves to accept the structure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting taking groups to the US. Definitely pre-COVID, every VC would say the same thing. You have to have a headco based here. And it had to be at Delaware because that's what they understood and blah, blah, blah. But now we're seeing, how many cap tables we see now with US investors into the Aussie headco, UK investors into the Aussie headco? It's definitely changed. Mate, just knowing your personal outcome, tax outcome from your exit and hearing the story of the 3 different jurisdictions, like you've done well to manage that, because like we were talking about before the potty, when you're trying to structure an exit, you've got the buyer and how they want to structure the deal. And meanwhile, there's your own personal situation as the founder and your investors and what they want out of the deal. And it's almost like you don't have as much control in that situation as the buyer. But yeah, well bloody done on how you navigated all that.
And so you built a business, you got the exit, and you're going again.
So I'm 32 and I didn't know what else to do, really. Have to build another company. The last business for me was, it sounds cliche, but it was really just learning. Like, I wouldn't say that any of it was done perfectly. That's not to say the new business is being done perfectly either, but the success or the acquisition of that business was sheer determination from the team, from everyone involved. It wasn't necessarily, it didn't have epic product market fit. It wasn't flying off the shelves. We built a business. We learnt a lot. It still exists today in part of a broader group, but I wanted to go and take what I'd learned and see if I could, to be honest, prove to myself, was that just hard work and a bit of luck, or do I know how to build companies? And so I stayed on for 2 and a bit years at Degreed and was an executive there as we went through probably nearly 100 million in revenue. We raised 150 million Series D, And so saw some great stuff, but I really like the building phase, not the scale and process phase. So I started Konfir 2.5 years ago, looking at what's the next market that I can use experiences I've had in HR recruitment, HR technologies, but something that was a bit more regulatory focused that you had to buy, which I like businesses like that, and that had a different go-to-market motion. It's more of a reseller embedded model and a leaner team with a better margin. So I'm saying all this in hindsight, but some of that was what I was trying to figure out, and some of it's what I have since learned. So yeah, we're 18 people now. We're all in the UK, and our customer base today is all in the UK. But on this week, I have had some meetings here in Australia to look at what the opportunity is here to launch that.
Because with that whole reg tech, we're finding Europe tends to lead with that. We've got an investment in a company where it's digital identifications, Apply ID. Anybody needing to do ID checks, they're the people to go to. In Australia, though, it's not law to do that on a whole lot of things, which is why money laundering between Australia and Canada is deemed to be incredibly high through property and other things. Whereas in the UK and Europe, it is law, and they don't have a choice. So the only choice they've got is to go and make it happen. And so, do you find though that you are best setting up before the regulation comes in and then just being there, or by the time the regulation has arrived, is the competitive opportunity gone because others have seen it? It seems to be an interesting one to try and time.
Yeah, I don't have an answer because we're in that boat right now. I can get back to you in a year.
Yeah,
but I think the regulation in the UK is in Europe, because it's so fractured, right? Like they've all got their different views on the world, and you got the UK now being out of the EU, so it wants to create its own legislation. It wants to replace GDPR with the data protection bill, just because why not? That's frustrating on one hand, but it creates opportunity on the other hand because there's new regulation that businesses need to adapt to. We are part of the same regulation that's coming as digital ID. So part of the data protection bill lays out a digital ID and attributes trust framework. So your ID is, are you a real person? Are you that person? The end attributes is, where'd you go to school? Where do you work? What's your date of birth? And we're the only certified attribute provider in the country for employment and income. But it's a framework and it's still in legislation. So you don't have to buy it. So we've taken the bet of, let's talk about that it is the future and that we're standing behind it and we're big advocates of it, to try and create the narrative and brand association to that, in the hope that when it becomes legislation and businesses start to need to adopt it, that we've got a massive head start, and most of them are already our customers because it's a good idea anyway. I think regulation should generally already be a good idea. So there's not a barrier to selling your product. Yeah, I mean, if there's a barrier to selling your product because it's not regulated yet, then I'd question, well, how good is the product really? I don't think that's what you're saying, but I think
right now, so you've got some of that upfront aspect, and then it's the attributes downstream that you're going to be bringing in. So that will really help corporates, especially that are trying to hire scalable global teams.
Yeah, exactly. So with Konfir, the business, our kind of mission is to help people progress through their key life events. That's getting a new job, moving house, buying a house, or any other kind of financial service or credit. And in all of those scenarios, you have to prove who you are, which is the ID bit. You have to prove where you work or where you have worked and how much money you earn. And digital ID has now come to solve the first part of that. There's a lot of work that still needs to happen from a regulation perspective. For example, in the UK, it only works for British passport holders. So I can't use digital ID because I'm on an Australian passport. That'll obviously evolve over time. And the EU's just signed off a whole of EU passport. So there's going to be lots of kind of opportunity for innovation. But on the employment and income bit, it's finding pay slips. It's getting a letter from your old employer. It's very manual and paper-based, and it takes a few weeks to complete. And increasingly, it's subject to fraud. So banks who are trying to check, is this a real pay slip, have the same technology, probably worse technology at their disposal to the fraudsters who are using all the generative technologies to build fake payslips. So what we've done is we've connected into the direct data sources where that information lives. So your bank account, your payroll system, your HR system, and then using consent and authentication, instantly we pull that data back, smash it together, put some machine learning on it and say, yeah, here's Aaron. His first job was here. This is what he earned. He then went traveling. Then he did this. Then he did this. And this is how much he's going to earn now. And then where we're heading is, and this is why Aaron's a really good bet into the future, because everyone like Aaron trajectory is this, and this is their total income. So ID is always before Konfir in the process. So they'll do ID for hiring or moving house or that kind of thing.
Yeah, I get it. I like it.
Yeah.
And it is it is a pain in the ass going through that whole process. But when you look at a lot of apps that are now delving into your bank account or delving into other areas and pulling that all together, yeah, it's going to be people that couldn't get debt before. Some of them will find it easier and some will find it harder because you can't tell porkies as much as you used to tick the self-employed box.
It's very true. Really true. And one of the things we hear from investors is there's a group of investors who love a founder to have their exit strategy, and then there's a group of investors who see it, having an exit strategy early is almost a sign of, well, you're not committed to building this great business. What's your view right now on? You're looking at an exit strategy already? We've talked about that.
I think you have to always keep an exit strategy in mind. I don't think as a founder and also from an investor hat, you don't want to waste time on things that aren't going to bear fruit, and you need to be focused on building the company. If you build a successful business that makes money, not loses money, it's not going to go anywhere, someone will buy it, right? That's kind of like, think about it in that order. But you've also got to then think about the market that you're operating in. Can you actually become the breakout success in that market based on how it's evolving? Or is it a market that you're just never going to really win because a big boy is going to move sideways and start acquiring, or someone else has some advantage that over time will overtake you? And I think not every business can be that breakout standalone business that goes public one day. So you need to just be honest about that. And then whichever one you are, you've always got to be positioning with other participants in the ecosystem, whether it's competitors, whether it's partners or other, because unless someone knows you and feels like they have a relationship, everything will then happen at arm's length. I don't know if you want to be approached by a investment bank who's doing a buy-side representation. It's all very formal. You want to go out and have a lunch with the CEO and they say, look, we're really interested to buy you. It's a much better process for everybody, and you'll probably have a better outcome. So I don't think you put your head in the sand, but I wouldn't spend like a day a week focusing on your exit strategy.
Yeah.
And you were talking before about age being a factor, but also wanting to use what you've learned and can you do it again? Do you feel like you got the same hunger from the first time? And related to that is, given the first time round teaches you how hard it is and there are things that just pop up that you didn't expect or whatever else, do you think it's a benefit the second time round knowing that, or do you lose some of your edge knowing what you know and that you may not go as hard as you did? Like that whole first time, second time founder thing could be an interesting discussion.
Yeah. So I think the first time round, you really don't know what you're in for. And I think the first time founders who are successful is just the ones who don't give up. I think that is that simple. It might not be a $1 billion business, but there'll be some success based on those people who just kept going. Now, keeping going means that you don't keep going on some other things. And I think everyone's had that experience where some other parts of your life don't work out because you just solely focused on that business part of your life. And I had that. The second time round, I have a few more life non-negotiables where I say, look, the business is important. It's critical. It has, again, unfortunately become my identity, which I didn't want it to be. But
well, you can't create a product in an identity space and then not have it become your identity.
But there's some things around the edge where I say, no, I'm just not going that far. Like on Adepto, there was no edge. I would do anything. Whereas this time it's like, no, actually there's some other things in my life that matter to me now. But what that I think also generates is a bit more of a efficient focus to say, well, because I'm not going to do that, therefore we need to do this better. We need to focus here. I'm going to make some decisions more quickly because I've seen this before and I think this is how it plays out. I might be wrong, but at least I know that I'll figure it out because I've backed myself and I've proved that to myself before. So I think you're a lot more efficient with whatever you choose to do. I don't have kids yet, but it's probably the same as when you start having kids. Your time's less, so you just need to be better at the things that you're focusing at.
Yeah, nice theory. The theory is correct.
It does. As painful as it is, I do find being a parent makes me more focused in the time that I'm not parenting.
Mm.
And yeah, it that definitely plays true. There's all sorts of other baggage that comes with it. General exhaustion, lack of sleep. My whole family's homesick right now, so yeah, it's definitely a challenge.
But it's that, and so for you, yeah, it sounds like you were able to pull a number of the positives the second time around, and it sounds like also becoming, yeah, your non-negotiables have actually become the things that are important to you in your life, and therefore this business is going to fit around that. Whereas I think you're right, first-time founders, because they haven't experienced the consequence, the loss of other things, the unintended consequences of certain focuses or behaviors, and then lost something that in hindsight was important. When you haven't had those experiences the second time round, you actually become a lot clearer on what is actually important and therefore how you're going to spend your time.
Absolutely. And I think that you can be a bit more, you can forward think a little bit more about how things might play out. You might be a bit more self-aware. If you say, right, we've got to this point and there's a big growth round coming, but I'm going to go and have a family now. It's like, that's cool. Well, let's get another CEO in. Whatever that might be, you can be a bit more dynamic to it rather than have to do all of it.
Yeah, that's very true. And then I look at your last 6 months and what you've navigated. You've had a fair bit of shit to deal with outside of the business, and like my very external, very distant view is you've navigated that unbelievably well. Do you think part of that is the virtue of having this is the second time round, and you're a bit more accustomed to the life throwing shit at you while you're trying to get stuff done?
Yeah, I think people ask me, how's business? And it doesn't matter how business actually is. The answer is, it's all right. It's going okay. I might have won a huge contract that day, or I might have had someone that was really important resign. And you get to just know that it's always up and down, and you can only ever take an average of the last couple of years, and then hopefully someone buys it one day. So yeah, I try not to get, like, I obviously get stressed, and the business means a lot to me. It means a lot more than I thought it would. When I started it, I'd made some money in the last exit. A lot of that's actually still in stock in that business that bought us. I thought, it's okay, I'll try this. If it doesn't work, not the end of the world. That falls away after 3 months.
Once you've given birth to something and your time's in it and it becomes a reflection of you, it's a bit hard to turn your back on it.
Yeah. So I totally feel like every other founder feels, working 6 days a week, 10, 12 hours a day. It's not like I'm sitting here with this great team and I sit back and go to lunches, but I still do the work. But I guess I just don't hype up the work that much. I'm not going and telling everyone how busy I am about work and I'm a founder and this and that. I just think that's just how it is. That's one part of my life, and sometimes it'll go well, sometimes it won't go well. But the other parts of my life that have been difficult the last 6 months certainly have taken a frustration toll on the business, because they've just taken time away. And that's where I find myself not maybe loving how I can show up sometimes as a founder, because I can get frustrated in other parts of my life because they're taking away from my time on the business. And that isn't fair on those other parts of life. And that's the thing I think that's always hard to navigate.
Oh, I can definitely relate to that bit.
And one of the things that your exit allowed you to do, correct me if I'm wrong, was look at a few angel investments. And so not only are you founder, you're invested in other founders. What's your what has your approach been to that? How do you work with those founders? Because there'd be an empathy and an understanding that being still in the trenches and invested in some of these people is a bit of an edge, I would have thought, compared to angels that have made their money in, say, professional other items.
Yeah. There's about 15 or so investments that I've made, and there's a variety of levels of those. One was an Australian company, actually, that I was a lot more hands-on with, and I was actually approached by one of their investors to say, can you come and look at this business? Like, I'm not sure if the executive team is doing what they need to be doing. And in that, I put some money in, and as well as I was given options, and I basically said, I don't think this business is going to survive by themselves, and we lined them up for an acquisition, and they were successfully acquired, and the business that bought them is probably going to list in the next couple of years. So that's the most intensive. Then there's a couple in the middle that are direct investments who have come through networks or friends of friends, where I'll generally do some advisory with them, maybe a day a month. And that, I think, works pretty well, because they'll send out a shareholder update, and I'll say, look, that part's great. This doesn't make any sense. Here's my shareholder update from last month. So I've got more recent and even real-time experience to say, why don't you try it this way? And then they'll have me on WhatsApp and say, how do you think about the rule of 40? Or we're hiring here. What do you think a good salary is? Or do you know anyone? And I always say, no. If I knew a great salesperson, I would have hired them. So don't ask me that one. And then there's the later ones, which are more just, I'm time poor, so I invest alongside funds that have invested in my previous business. So I trust them, and they can do better DD than I can do. So I just co-invest with those. Yeah, it's been where I started investing in 2020 was the top of the market. So there are yet to be any roaring successes. A lot of pay to plays. So having to put money in that I wasn't expecting to have to put in, or I'd get wiped off the cap table, which has been pretty frustrating and very common. But it's been a bit of fun.
I think that is important. I can't remember what podcast I was listening to, but it's what they were saying for that early stage. The first 20 investments need to be seen as the learning experience and the fun. Some people get lucky, and there's a great one in there, but actually the pattern recognition starts after you've had a few things like that whole pay to play and been through a cycle. And it's not an uncommon thing. But with now that you've done 15, what are some of the things that you've learned to look for that maybe you weren't looking for when you first started in the angel side?
Yeah, I think the founders that do well, it's like you just described at the start of the podcast. They're open-minded. They're responsive to whatever they learn through being open-minded. They're action-oriented, and they're not too pig-headed in, no, this is what we're doing and this is the only right way. You meet investors and advisors who say, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? And you found it wants to roll their eyes and go, yeah, of course I've thought about that. But you're never going to get anywhere rolling your eyes. You have to say, yeah, that's a great idea. Like,
they know how to play.
Don't burn your time on that great idea necessarily if you think it's the wrong one, but demonstrate that you're open to feedback, that you can work with other people. So the way that I would, if I was investing, I'd want to meet a founder, and I'd want to track them without burning too much of their time for a couple of months, see some things go wrong, see how they navigate those things, and see how they learn from your feedback or other people's feedback. Because if they can do all those things, they're still at it, they're adapting as they go, and they're communicating in the right way. And communication, I think, is really important for founders. And I see a lot of them do it really poorly. Then you look at the product and the market and all the rest.
I think that aligns to us. Our view is that, like, actually, until you're in the trenches, in the shit, don't think that you actually understand what the personality really is, because it's only until we're stressed and heart rates are up and all the debris of our childhood comes floating to the surface. And that's why we like doing the offsites multiple times a year, the missions. Like, when you're tired and jet lagged and being pushed 16 hours a day, you'll start to see some traits float to the surface.
Yeah, absolutely. And what are you seeing at the moment that's interesting you? Like, what's exciting you in the market
From an investor
as an
perspective?
investor?
I'm sitting back at the moment, to be honest, because I think that this whole AI step change is yet to really play out. I think it's hard to see who that helps, who that hinders, who that makes obsolete. So I haven't made any investments for some time now. But I'm also, I was mentioning to you earlier, starting to track some of the defense innovation and defense technology. I think that that's a necessary space. The best deterrence is a good offense, effectively, and that's where the world is right now. So I think that's interesting, and I'm watching that. It's not a space I know anything about, but those are the spaces I like the most. To try and learn them.
Yeah, we had a session here with Vu Tran from Go One, and he was asked with his investing, does he invest in health given he's a GP? And he's like, no way. I just know all the reasons why that fails. But I really like defence because I know nothing about it. And I think there's some merit in that. And coming back to it, to me, it's those founder traits. Yes, there are some tailwinds that VCs can look at in terms of inevitability. We've all seen really great products that don't see the light of day, and then really shitty products that get to the top. Well, we've just ticked over the hour mark, and I'm mindful of time. You're going to be joining us this Friday.
Yep. I'll be down Friday afternoon.
Down at Wollumbar. What have we got on Friday, Aaron?
Friday, we kick off the offsite. We've got 18 to 20 founders joining us. And then I haven't shared this with Don yet. I was telling Chris before, but I may have over-invited to the investor sunset drinks. And
that's something different. Given our UK missions are 20 people.
And now we have 32, maybe 33 as of yesterday. But as well as the offsite, you'll be joining us in London. More like we're joining you in London, but you'll be coming to different parts of the mission.
That's right. London Tech Week. Wouldn't miss it.
Yeah. No, and mate, I'm so stoked to have you on the podcast. And really, Tribe exists in no small part because of your story. Like that first mission to the UK and taking over and seeing how you navigated that was in my mind with the foundation of Tribe. Like Aussie founders are absolutely world class. When they survive the Australian market, if I put it that way, and scale into a global market, there needs to be more support to help them do that. And I think you're an absolute case study of what is possible. And hats off to you because you just navigated that unbelievably well. But yeah, you are part of the DNA of Tribe through that story. So I'm absolutely stoked to have you on the potty. Stoked that you're coming to the offsite. You'll be joining us in London. And mate, even more stoked you're one of our shareholders now as well. So welcome to Tribe and being part of the team because you're very much in our DNA.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. I'm stoked to be involved, and thanks for the invite in 2015.
Absolutely echo everything Aaron said, and really appreciate you coming on board.
Thanks. Look forward to Friday.
See you Friday.
Yeah, see you then.